Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining me today on the last DBT session in our Mindfulness Hub. I'm wrapping up the fourth module in dialectical behavioral therapy, which is Interpersonal Effectiveness, or how to be successful and savvy in our relationships. I'll be talking today about a concept known as walking the middle path, which talks about dialectics, validation or invalidation, and strategies for changing behaviors. Some of these ideas and concepts may have been mentioned in other lessons or modules, but I'll just be going into more detail today. In the very first lesson, where I gave an overview of dialectical behavioral therapy, I described dialectics as a worldview that forms the basis of DBT, or dialectical behavioral therapy. Dialectics basically has three primary characteristics. The first stresses the wholeness of reality, directs our attention to the immediate and larger context of behavior, as well as to the interrelatedness of individual behavior patterns. The second, reality is comprised of internal opposing forces, thesis and antithesis. Dichotomous extreme thinking, behavior, and emotions are viewed as dialectical failures. So the individual has become stuck in polarities, unable to move towards synthesis. Thirdly, dialectics assumes that the nature of reality is change. Both the individual and the environment are undergoing continuous transition. In essence, every relationship is one of continuous transition and change. So what was all of that mumbo jumbo basically to say? Living in the gray area, that's how I like to view dialectics. Balancing opposites while entering the paradox of yes and no, true and not true, at the very same time. Living in the gray. So, to go into a little bit more about dialectics. Dialectics reminds us that the universe is filled with opposing sides and forces. There's always more than one way to see a situation, more than one way to solve a problem. Two things that seem like opposites can both be true. Dialectics also reminds us that everything and every person is connected in some way. The waves in the ocean are one. The slightest move of the butterfly can affect the furthest star. Dialectics remind us that change is the only constant. Meaning and truth evolve over time. Each moment is new. Reality itself changes with each moment, and change is transactional. Dialectics reminds us that what we do influences our environment and other people in it. The environment and other people also influence us in return. So just to go over some examples of how to think and act dialectically, how can we think and act more in the gray, the nuance rather than the black and white? So when we think about how there is always more than one side to anything that exists, how can we look for both sides? Well, we can ask our wise mind, what am I missing? Where's the kernel of truth in the other side? Remember that wise mind is that balance in between reason and emotion. Another way is to let go of extremes, change either or to both and, change always or never to sometimes. Another way is to balance opposites, validate both sides when you disagree, accept reality, and work to change. What is validate? Don't worry, I'll go into that in a little bit. Another way to look for both sides is to play devil's advocate or embrace confusion. You can even use metaphors and storytelling to unstick and free the mind. Another way to think and act dialectically is to be aware that you are connected. How do we do that? Well, treat others as you want them to treat you. Look for similarities among people instead of differences, or notice the physical connections among all things. Be aware that we are all connected. Another way to think and act dialectically is to embrace change. Just throw yourself into it, allow it, embrace it. Practice radical acceptance of change. Remember radical acceptance? Practice that when rules, circumstances, people, and relationships change in ways that you don't like. Practice getting used to change. Make small changes to practice this, such as purposely change where you sit, who you talk with, what route you take when going to a familiar place. And a fourth way to think and act dialectically, remember that you affect your environment and your environment affects you, which is basically saying that change is transactional. So pay attention to your effect on others and how they affect you. Practice letting go of blame by looking for how your own and others' behaviors are caused by many interactions over time. It's probably not one or the other. It's probably both. Remind yourself that all things, including all behaviors, are caused by something else. You affect your environment and your environment affects you. Cycle of life. So another aspect of walking the middle path is validation. What is validation? Validation means finding the kernel of truth in another person's perspective or situation, verifying the facts of a situation. It means acknowledging that a person's emotions, thoughts, and behaviors have causes and are therefore understandable. Validation means not necessarily agreeing with the other person. Validation is not validating what is actually invalid. So why do we validate? Well, it improves our relationships by showing we are listening and understand. It improves interpersonal effectiveness by reducing the pressure to prove who's right, reducing negative reactivity, and reducing anger overall. It makes problem solving, closeness, and support possible. And also the opposite of validating, invalidation, it hurts. So we want to validate the valid, only the valid. We want to validate the facts of a situation, stick to the facts. We want to validate a person's experiences, feelings and emotions, beliefs or opinions about something. We want to validate suffering and difficulties. Some important things to remember. Every invalid response makes sense in some way. Validation is not necessarily agreeing. Validation doesn't mean you like it. Only validate the valid. Now I want to go over a how-to guide to validate. Step 1, pay attention. Look interested, listen, and observe. No multitasking. Make eye contact, stay focused. Nod occasionally, and respond with your face, such as smiling, at happy statements, or looking concerned when hearing something painful. So step 1, pay attention. Step 2, reflect back. Say back what you heard or observed to be sure you actually understand what the person is saying. No judgmental language or voice tones. Try to really get what the person feels or thinks. Have an open mind. No disagreeing, criticizing, or trying to change the person's mind or goals. Use a voice tone that allows the other person to correct you. And check the facts. One example could be, so you are mad at me because you think I lied just to get back at you. Did I get that right? Step 3, read minds. What? No, okay, so what this means is be sensitive to what is not being said by the other person. Pay attention to facial expressions, body language, what's happening, and what you know about the person already. Show that you understand in words or by your actions, and be open to correction. For example, when you ask a friend for a ride at the end of a long day, and the person slumps down, you can say, oh, you look really tired. Let me look for someone else. You're basically just being sensitive to someone's cues, maybe non-verbally. Step 4 in our how-to guide to validate, understand. Look for how the other person feels, is thinking, or if they're making sense, given the person's history, state of mind. or current events, even if you don't approve of the person's behavior or their belief is incorrect. An example of this could be if you sent a party invitation to the wrong address, say, I can see why you thought I might be excluding you on purpose. In the case of a misunderstanding, a mix-up. Step 5 in our how-to guide to validate, acknowledge the valid. Show that you see that the person's thoughts, feelings, or actions are valid given current reality and facts. Act as if the person's behavior is valid. For example, if you're criticized for not taking out the trash on your day, admit that it is your day and take it out. If people present a problem, help them solve it, unless they just want to be heard. If people are hungry, give them food. Acknowledge the effort a person is making. And finally, step 6 in our how-to guide. Show equality. Be yourself. Don't one up or one down the other person. Treat the other as an equal, not as fragile or incompetent. For example, be willing to admit mistakes. Give up being defensive. Be careful in giving advice or telling someone what to do if you're not asked or required. So as a recap, a how-to guide to validate. Step 1, pay attention. Step 2, reflect back. Step 3, read minds or just be sensitive to the nonverbal cues. Step 4, understand what the other person is feeling or saying. Step 5, acknowledge the valid. Show that you see their thoughts and feelings are valid. And 6, show equality. Be yourself. Treat the other person as an equal. And finally, another way for walking the middle path is using strategies for changing behavior, using behavioral principles to increase desired behaviors or decrease the undesired behaviors. So I'm just going to go over a couple of psychology terms. Maybe you've taken a psychology class over the course of your life. You might have heard some of these terms. So first, I'll talk about some strategies for increasing the probability of a behavior that you want. First, you have to describe the behavior for yourself or others that you would like to start or increase. Then we have what is known as a reinforcer. A reinforcer is a consequence that increases the frequency of a behavior. Positive reinforcement equals positive consequences or a reward. So the behavior is increased by the consequences a person wants, likes, or will work to get. On the contrary, a negative reinforcement removes the negative event and provides relief. So the behavior is increased by consequences that stop or reduce something negative. So reinforcer, a consequence that increases the frequency of a behavior. We also have shaping, which is reinforcing small steps towards the behavior you want. Reinforce small steps that lead towards the goal. As a new behavior stabilizes, a little bit more reinforcing might be required, and then you continue until you reach that goal behavior. Remember that timing counts. It's important to reinforce behavior immediately after it occurs. When shaping new behavior, at first reinforce every instance of the behavior. Once behavior is established, gradually start to reinforce only some of the time. So a strategy for decreasing or stopping the unwanted behavior is extinction, satiation, and punishment. Extinction is stopping an ongoing reinforcement of behavior. Extinction leads first to a burst of behavior, but then to a decrease of the behavior. Satiation is providing relief or what is wanted before that behavior occurs. It reduces motivation for the behavior and thus decreases its frequency. Then we have punishment. That's an aversive consequence that decreases a behavior. Behavior is decreased by consequences that the person dislikes. Behavior is decreased by consequences that stop or reduce something positive. And behavior is decreased when something that person wants is withheld until the harmful effects of problem behaviors are corrected. Be sure that punishment is specific, time-limited, and fits the crime, if you will. Avoid a punitive tone. Let the consequence do the work. If a natural punishment occurs, don't undo it. Don't add arbitrary punishment. Be sure to reinforce alternative behavior to replace behavior you want stopped. Extinction and punishment weaken or suppress behavior, but do not eliminate it. Extinction and punishment do not teach new behavior. To keep a behavior from resurfacing, reinforce an alternative behavior. Punishment only works when the punisher is present. So again, those strategies for decreasing behavior, extinction, satiation, or punishment, those strategies for increasing the probability of the behavior, reinforcement, and shaping. Those are all different ways to walk the middle path, which can help us balance acceptance and change. Thank you so much for joining me this month and all year, where we learned all different ways to add mindfulness to our lives, ways to get more control over our distress, our emotion regulation, and our interpersonal relationships. Take care, and as always, stay kind to yourself.